G'day guys, ZiggyD here, and I'm here with Chris Wilson.
Hello.
One and only, g'day. Good to have you here. Today we've decided that we're just going to do answering all of your random questions, because this whole 10-act system has brought up a lot of questions, like how do bandits work and all of that. So people are kind of panicking about all that stuff, so I'm going to dump all that on you.
Not a problem.
But first, how about yesterday? How was that announcement of this that you've been building up to for so long?
Oh, that was an amazing day. We figured players were going to like it. I mean, it was something we've been looking forward to showing off for quite a long time now, and we were hoping people would like it. But the response and, 250,000 views on the YouTube video in the first day.
Already.
500,000 people going to the announcement page, #1 on Reddit, like overall worldwide for several hours. People from high school mailing me saying, you made a game. There's a lot of stuff that happened yesterday.
It was like #1 on every subreddit as well.
Yeah, like Reddit overall as a whole site, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty juicy.
Yeah, it was a good day.
Is that probably your most successful announcement, besides like launch, I guess?
It's just second to the Xbox announcement in terms of response, I suspect.
Okay. In terms of volume of response.
Intensity of response.
Intensity of response. Okay, I think that's a good point. So I have my most important question first from this random list of questions. And this is my own personal one, actually.
Sure.
Can we officially abbreviate Fall of Oriath to FOO?
So this is something I realized in the middle of the night. I kind of woke up in a sweat realizing what kind of acronym we had here. Now bear in mind, we care a lot about acronyms, right? Like Path of Exile's original candidate name before it was called Path of Exile, we really liked the name One with Nothing, which was own, which in old school 90s hacker jargon is something you do, like schooling someone, Yeah. Nowadays you wreck them, so the lexicon moved on a little bit. But we really like cool acronyms, and we're happy with Poe, Edgar Allan Poe and so on. FOO is a bit awkward, so I'd rather people call it Fall or Oriath or the good one.
Okay, we'll see what we can do about that. So this has been a big panic one. You were originally quoted as saying, and I don't know how accurate this actually is, this idea of you eventually want to expand Path of Exile to 10 acts and then you're stopping.
Right.
Is that happening now that you're there?
So the original quote, and I haven't looked this up to see exactly how it was originally phrased, but the thought behind it at the time was people worried that we were just planning a certain amount of content. So we said, look, there'll be like 10 acts, right? We're planning to do this for a decade. There's going to be a ton of content. And that is completely unrelated to the 10-act plan that we came up with more recently. Yeah. So the sentiment of we're going to keep upgrading the game for as long as we can is only reinforced by the fact that this 10-act span here is going to cause the game to become even more popular and more upgradable. So project that number out to like 25 or something if you want, and this doesn't mean we release 6 at a time every time, of course. But
don't get used to that.
The nature of content in the future, there'll probably be more acts in the storyline. There will probably be more side content. There'll probably be replacements to stuff, right? We don't know what it is, and we like to jump around from expansion to expansion doing unpredictable things, right? Like, in-game revamp and then core leveling revamp, and who knows, whatever the game needs. And this is something we have to talk about because we're planning a 3.2 expansion. The schedule says December, right? Who knows what that's going to be. We're going to work it out soon. We're going to start working on it, and it will hopefully be whatever Path of Exile needs next.
So you've got this like massive story one as well now. Does that mean with the recent endgame revamp and now the big story revamp, does that kind of leave you room to focus on some of the other things? Have you been thinking about what the next expansion might be? We
haven't got any solid ideas on the next expansion, partly because we want to get feedback from the community and see how the Fall of Oriath stuff is taken and so on. And there will be revamps of other systems. I mean, the community have their gigantic list they're thinking about right now of all the things they'd love us to improve. And this is stuff that we will improve over time.
Yeah, nice. So we'll kind of see how it pans out.
Absolutely. And there will be plenty more story arcs coming as well.
So in the video that I did showing Act 6, I kind of showed off that the Fetid Pool changed into the Kurui Fortress.
Yes.
And a lot of people have been noting that was a side quest, but it seemed like that kind of result hinged on our actions in the previous side quest. But a lot of people just didn't do that quest. So is that sort of thing going to become a mandatory quest now? Or is there's some other kind of like story explanation for how things change?
The nice thing about this particular case is that if you don't go in the Fetid Pool and you don't do the side quest and then you see it as a Kurui Fortress later, it doesn't necessarily look wrong to you. It's an area that you haven't seen. It's content to play. And so we don't intend to make side quests mandatory. It'll be really annoying to have to go and do Cadaverous to get some respec points at that point in the quest as a mandatory thing before you play through.
Yep.
We'll certainly turn racing on its head for sure. And because of the way it works, it doesn't really matter whether the player notices every little callback to the original playthrough. Astute players, whether they play it or not, if they know that there was a fetid pool there, then they can appreciate the fact that it's being defetited.
So I guess you could just explain it away as like the crew came and cleaned it up or something, right?
Yeah.
What about ones that have decisions, like the Bandit Quests? What's happening with stuff like that?
Well, the Bandit Quest in Part 1, and by Part 1 we refer to Acts 1 through 5, Part 2 is Acts 6 through 10 as internal jargon here. The Bandit Quests in Part 1 are mostly unmolested. I mean, there's probably some balancing that's going to happen with the rewards in light of the fact that there aren't Bandit Quests 2 and 3 anymore, but we have various stuff in the second playthrough which acts as standing quest rewards. The Pantheon system can be seen as part of it. You're getting these powers, and so it's very likely that we're not going to have an equivalent Bandit Quest for what were previously Cruel and Merciless difficulty. You get your single set of Bandit rewards, which will probably be rebalanced somewhat, and then you're getting other quest rewards from the Part 2 content that make up for that.
Does the game take into account your decisions with the Act 1 Bandit Quest, Act 2 Bandit Quest?
It does. I can't talk about Act 7.
Okay, all right. Safe to say there's story-related elements that might tie in.
Yeah, that's safe to say.
Okay. What about skill point quests? Because there's a lot of skill point quests that will essentially be gone because there's not that repetition now. Are we getting the same number of skill points, more or less?
Yeah, our current plan is the same number of skill points, so they'll be moved around to the new content. There's now essentially 10 acts rather than 12 repeated ones, and so we'll juggle stuff around until we have the same number of skill points.
Okay, so it'll kind of pan out into other quests and things like that. Neato. So then on a similar note, what about Trials in the Labyrinth? That's going to have to change, surely.
Right, so the current plan with this is, and we've talked about a lot of different combinations for how this could work, and the current plan is that there are trials sprinkled throughout the game. The ones in Part 1 are exactly the same as where they were before, and there are more trials that are throughout Part 2. And there are a certain number of trials that you need to do to gain access to each of the labyrinths. So previously you do all of the ones in a difficulty and you get access to the labyrinth. Now there'll be, you do X trials, get access to the first labyrinth, do Y trials and get access to the second. And it's very likely there'll be one entrance to all of the labyrinths. So you go to the statue in Act 3, that gets you to the area where you can choose which difficulty of labyrinth you pick. So that's still 3 labyrinths during the main game, and 1 map labyrinth for a total of 4. Now people have asked us, well, why not drop a labyrinth? Then we looked into it. And apart from the fact that we don't really want to drop a labyrinth, there's also the real difficulty with ascendancy points. Currently it's 2, 2, 2, 2 for 8. And if you drop it down, there are various ways you can stack this up, such as 3, 3, 2, in which case you're getting a kind of halfway to your next big point, which is a problem, or 2, 3, 3, in which case it's great for the first labyrinth and then awkward for the second, and then you've got a ton of points on the map one, which is a problem because it's hard for everyone to do the map labyrinth. And all of these different permutations just feel really bad. So maybe we can scrap all the ascendancy classes and redo them with different numbers of points and stuff. But what's really the point? I mean, at the moment it's fine to play through the labyrinth 4 times as long as they feel sufficiently different. And in order to achieve that, we're actually going to work on simplifying potentially the normal labyrinth down by potentially dropping a zone from it, like a whole section. Yeah. So that way it's easier to do the first one. We understand that some players find it a bit of a chore to play through 3 labyrinths, ignoring the map one, and so this will take a bit of the pressure off on the normal one. Now, all of this stuff here is just our tentative plan at the moment. We plan to test it, especially in the beta. Plenty of feedback, right? I'm sure the community will have a ton of opinions, which we will read and take into account and do our own testing, and eventually we'll work out something that fits really well. And if it doesn't work, we'll just change it again in the next expansion and pretend that's the next new thing.
Perfect. So, a lot of things were tied into the difficulty system. Including resistance penalties and death penalties. How will they be changing or handled now?
So our current plan is that there's a plot event which causes your resistances to go down by 30%. Cool. And then another plot event, potentially in the parallel act later on, which causes your resistances to go down by another 30%. So this is tied into something which we don't really want to spoil at the moment, and it makes a lot more sense rather than welcome to crawl, the numbers are different. Yeah,
because it was just never explained. It was just like, the game's harder now.
It was explained previously, didn't you play Diablo? You know.
It was explained in another game.
Yeah, well, a genre trope, basically.
Yeah.
So death penalties we're still working on. We don't have as firm a plan there. I mean, there will still be death penalties in the game. And it's worth noting, this is time for my personal rant here, a lot of standard players say that hardcore players don't understand the frustration of death penalties. But I'll tell you this, hardcore players have it worse for death penalties. Because in standard, when you die and lose experience, you can just go and level up and gain the experience back again. But in hardcore, when you die and you do lose experience, you drop down the ladder and you can't level back up again. I just thought I'd have that rant. It's a common thing which bugs me.
You just trying to start a hardcore versus softcore war in my video? Yes. Perfect.
It's my soapbox.
Okay.
Enjoy the comment section.
Thanks. So 3.0 is already pretty massive. We've got this 6 extra acts.
Yes, fab.
And it's very leveling focused, essentially. Like it's completely revamping the leveling system. What are you going to be focusing on with the Challenge League that goes along with it? There's still going to be a Challenge League.
Absolutely, yeah, the schedule continues on. So to clarify, the Legacy League, which we're announcing this week in more details about, is for 2.6.0. So that's, as you know, before the Fall of Oriath. And what Ziggy's referring to here is the Challenge League that comes out with the Fall of Oriath later in the year. And so the goal when designing something like this, and I say when designing because we haven't designed this Challenge League yet. We are working on the current one, and then we'll work on that one during the final part of the Fall of Oriath's development. But the goal with this kind of Challenge League that has to coexist alongside leveling stuff is usually to not take the player out of what they're doing leveling-wise. So for example, Breach would be a problem, where you're trying to experience the storyline of the new stuff. You've got these interesting encounters and cool environments you have to look at, but suddenly you're in another dimension fighting aliens and potentially progressing relatively far from where you started off. In fact, our first initial versions of Breach actually had an interesting mechanic where the world kind of freezes outside of the breach and you end up quite far away because it's not an expanding thing. So when the breach ends, it kind of fades back into normal and you're in a different place than where you were because that's where you've gone in the other dimension, as it were.
Spooky.
So there are a bunch of things there. And that really wouldn't work well with the exploration through the new 6 acts, because you're trying to experience Act 5 for the first time. And now, how did I get to this other side of the area? What's going on? And so a league like, and this isn't saying the league's like that because we haven't even had a discussion of what the league will be, but a league like Ambush, where there's a self-contained encounter, for example, is the kind of thing that doesn't ruin the level experience. Having said that, I kind of feel we'll be doing a few leagues that involve finding a thing that's static and then interacting with it to open a fight up, right? It would be nice to have a league that has a bit more, out-of-the-box kind of thinking going on. So we're certainly going to be taking a lot of interesting league ideas on board for this particular one.
I like when you say out-of-the-box thinking and interacting with a thing that has a fight. It sounds yes. A lot like lockboxes.
So you're right that I say we don't want to do Ambush. We want something where it comes out of the box.
So how does this interact with endgame now? Like, you're kind of moving to less acts overall. You're going from 12 to 10,
yes.
But it kind of seems longer from my testing of it. What level do you start maps? Like, in what act now? How does that change?
So with regard to it being longer, I think part of the reason is that normally people are getting pretty efficient at running through Cruel and Merciless, if you see what I mean. You kind of stop at the leveling areas. You briefly stop at Fell Shrine or whatever you want to catch up on stuff where it's a nice controllable grinding area, Dried Lake especially. So to answer your question about the level, we're actually targeting to try to have exactly the same level the maps start at.
Okay.
So previously, while there were 12 acts essentially counting the replays, maps started at Act 10, halfway through Act 3 in Merciless. Now maps will still probably start in Act 10 when you find some equivalent to the Eternal Lab in whatever the Act 10 area is that you'll get to see, which, as you probably worked out, is a revisit to Oriath. And this means that while there won't be very much progression past in the regular storyline past the point where we have access to maps, it means we can target the same level. And this is important because juggling the tiers around all the time is a problem for players. I mean, I know that some people like item inflation, where we have to add an extra 10 levels to the game and add a whole bunch of new items, but this also invalidates the work that you've done so far. People have characters instead that they care about, and the ability for those characters to continue mapping without being destroyed by the fact that we arbitrarily shifted stuff around is important. There's always a temptation in an expansion to increase the level cap or something like that, right? Like to go, you know what, guys, we're invalidating everyone's work and adding all these new base types in that are super powerful and all your stuff is garbage and you can get 120 now and all this kind of stuff. But this is massively devastating to the actual game as we know it. So in order to do that, we would have to have really good reasons. We'd have to get to the point where we wanted to insert these new levels and items to solve a specific problem. And I do not feel that we're anywhere near that stage at the moment. Okay. We want to make sure that people's progress carries on directly into this without the experience you get in some MMOs where the expansion's released and the quest item you get from the first guy is better than the thing you raided for the entire season previously. Yeah. So that's not really a Path of Exile way of doing it. And while, 6 years from now, maybe we have adjusted the level cap or added a new tier of items by then, it's certainly not something that we're planning for this year.
Okay, so we won't be seeing any endgame inflation. Will we be seeing new maps from the new Act 5 tile sets?
I'd like to say so. We haven't yet started revamping the Atlas for 3.0. There's a possibility, for example, that we do some major, much larger changes to the Atlas in 3.1's Challenge League release, or potentially in the 3.2 expansion, whatever the game needs at the time. The Atlas has had a great impact on player retention, and one of the subtle things here is that the Pantheon system encourages you to kill bosses in each of the Atlas maps, because they upgrade your Pantheon powers. So this will also be additional incentive for you to go and perform an action. I'm not sure if the other developers have talked to the public yet about how that actually happens, like how you gain those powers, but you have to do that stuff against these bosses, which is pretty interesting and will increase the amount of stuff to do in the Atlas.
Rory's given us some hints.
Okay, cool.
You can let little extra bits slip out if you want.
I'm just going to keep my hands off that one.
Okay, all right. So now I have some mandatory questions that I have to ask you, or I get in trouble. Trading.
Okay, trading.
anything for trading in 3.0?
The reason why we're not announcing significant changes to trading at the moment are that we're still experimenting with stuff, and we want to make sure we have the right answer. And the experiments continue on many fronts, right? Like, for example, we have a different trading system on the Chinese realm. We're getting really valuable feedback from there. There were moments where we were close to suggesting a similar system for our realm. There were moments where we thought to do a hybrid. There were moments when we've decided to not do anything related to that at all in our realm. It really depends on what we're trying to go for. And we kind of have an ecosystem in our realm where the existence of PoE.trade and the validation of the community, Stash Tab API and stuff, because we're literally selling public tabs, means that there's always going to be fast indexed item searching available. And this is pretty different than realms like China, where the emphasis is much more on convenient finishing of a transaction, but a harder time actually finding the item you're looking for. And there's pros and cons to both. Now, we have elements of that system we could potentially pull into the main one on our realm if we wanted to, like the ability to do offers that complete asynchronously and so on. But we're careful with this. And the reason why is because there's a significant danger that we end up short-circuiting a lot of the actual item acquisition process of the game. There's quite a lot of evidence that people who trade jump ahead really far on how far their character is progressing, skipping out a lot of the actual getting a build and improving it with incremental upgrades kind of process. Now, we love trading and want it to stay, but we're just being really careful to make sure we've picked the right thing before we actually unveil it. And so this is a heated thing that actually involves a lot of experimentation internally with a lot of opinions, and I'm sorry that we're slow to put together an official answer on the trading stuff. I would love to have more information for 3.0, can't promise it, but there is one side thing. In the next few weeks, we'll be announcing some tiny thing related to trading. It's just a small thing we've been doing, which helps a little bit, and it's not meant to be a big deal. When we announce this, please do not overreact with, oh my god, is that literally all you've been doing? It's just a thing we want to give you. Now, we've avoided announcing this yet because we wanted to get the 3.0 announcement out of the way, because it will be completely underwhelming for us to say, here's a small trade thing, due to the fact it's quite a small thing. And so we'll be announcing this, and it's absolutely not a big deal whatsoever. But do not interpret that announcement as just this is literally all that's been happening with trade in the background. It is just a thing which we have decided to release, which is really small. So no hype. Actually, no hype, seriously.
It's really interesting that you're taking the complete reverse situation to what you were doing before, where people felt like you were overhyping 3.0. Now you're trying to underhype.
The reason why we were hyping 3.0 is it represents hundreds of man years of work and 6 acts and everything. This thing here is just a tiny little trade thing that a few people will appreciate. Most people will, it won't necessarily affect their gameplay. And we just want to get it released without any particular drama. So when that happens, if you like it, give us some feedback. If you don't like it, give us some feedback.
All right, so non-hype trade announcement coming soon. Don't get excited.
Yeah, it's a really small thing.
Okay, all right. In terms of balance for this, we haven't had any announcements yet because it's pretty far out, but do you have any overall ideas of what sort of things people can expect in balance in 3.0?
I suspect that they'll be surprised at the amount of rebalancing occurring in 2.6.
Okay. So what's coming early?
So a lot of people have said, well, obviously all the balance is being pushed away until 3.0. Now, I'm not supposed to talk about the balance stuff myself because the guys who work on it change it every day. But I do know that the double dipping changes are extensive enough and requiring enough time that they're very unlikely to make it into 2.6 or make it into 3.0. But we're planning a lot of detail about the 2.6 balance stuff, like the announcement, which probably is relatively contemporaneous with this video, the Thursday American time this week, will give some bullet points as what balance changes are coming in 2.6, and then we'll probably have manifestos and follow-ups, at the very least, the patch notes. So normally, in a challenge league that doesn't have an expansion, we try to be relatively cautious with balance changes, because it really sucks if you destroy someone's build and the only incentive to play that league is the fact that you've got a fancy challenge league. However, we have a 2.6 release and then a beta and then 3.0, which is 3 releases to get the balance in a really good state for the things that the community are concerned about. And I want to take advantage of all 3. And so we're going to make some balance changes in 2.6. Yep. Then we're going to try some more balance changes in the beta. And then we're going to try some more during and then at the release. And that way we get more iterative cycles in there to fix various things. And there are a lot of hot topics here. There's stuff like the presence of, the energy shield versus life stuff. There's questions about how leech should work with both life and energy shield and how instant that is. There's a whole bunch of things. The dominance of daggers, double dipping. Lots of topics that sound really scary, and I'm sorry if your build is affected, but it is to improve the game. And thankfully there's a ton of new content that you can play coming out, and a really awesome challenge league in a few weeks, which will be a good opportunity to try playing a different build. In addition, I don't know if anyone's talked about what we're doing with Threshold Jewels yet, but that stuff unlocks so many new builds in terms of the amount of cool stuff.
I don't know about that yet.
Yeah, I'm not gonna fill that in here, but there'll be some interesting new builds available.
On the topic of beta, whenabouts is that set, and how are you guys handling things like invites and that for that this time?
With regard to timing, we're trying to be relatively loose with our exact timing for that because it doesn't help anyone if we're locking down a specific date. Like for Legacy, we're absolutely locking down March 3rd because that's when it's getting released. Totally fine. For the beta, we're saying, late April, early May. Well, you know what? If in early May it's not ready, it's late May, and we'll see, right? I mean, I'm hoping for late April. Likewise with the actual release date. For the beta, it's very likely we'll follow our usual pattern with that, but this time we'll be much clearer with the communication about what options there will be to get in. It's very safe to say that if you're a supporter who's put more than, say, $500 into the game, that you'll probably have day one access. Yep. It's safe to say that if you buy the new set of Fall of Oriath supporter packs that are coming out then, they probably come with access. It's also safe to say that if you email us asking for a key, that you don't get one, because people are writing in thinking that they just have to ask and they get a key. Well, we don't even have keys, right? Like the beta hasn't even been started for a while now, so please stop emailing us. It's wasting everyone's time. Like if I told you the game would be 5% better in terms of development if we don't have to answer key emails. The irony is this will increase the number of emails we get. No one will be given a key for asking. Do not.
Stop impacting development.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time and answering all those questions. Awesome stuff.
Enjoy.
Cheers.